So hello, anybody who's watching this. Welcome to the Dharma Gates podcast. Just a few words about Dharma Gates before we start the conversation with Nisabho Bhikku here. So Dharma Gates is a 501c3 that works to connect young people to opportunities for formal meditation practice, primarily retreats, residential training, and more kind of traditional forms uh, of meditation. And so I wanted to have this conversation with Nisabho Bhikku, who's a ordained monastic in the Thai forest tradition. We'll hear more about his story in a minute, but about just the topic of ordination and what it means, what's the intention, and also just the logistics and kind of more raw experience of what is ordination, what's it mean, and how does it work. So I think I won't go too much more into Dharma Gate stuff, and we'll just have a conversation, and then see, maybe as we wrap things up at the end, I'll say a little bit more. But hello, thanks for joining me, Nisabho Bhikku. I was curious if the best way really to get an introduction on somebody is to hear their story from themselves. And um, I'm curious how you got to where you are right now, particularly. It doesn't have to be a long answer. This could be like a couple minutes, but what was the kind of first contact point with this world of Buddhist practice, and how did it end up that you're now sitting here in your, I believe, mid-30s in robes? It's a relatively unconventional trajectory. So maybe just share a little bit about yeah, what's your story?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for Aaron for having me in Dharma Gates as well. It's a really good intention of an organization. I think I could have benefited from something like it back in the day. But I was lucky enough to kind of stumble on this world without it. Speaking to the question as to where I'm sitting right now, I'm in Seattle in a little hut. Uh, Basically, for the last year and a half, we've been working to just living here as a monk, but then sort of allowing and seeing a community and a potential monastery coalesce around the area. And the project's called Clear Mountain, so it's Clear Mountain Monastery. But there's no monastery yet. It's in scare quotes very much. So it's a website and me, and to some extent another monk, and just a community that's growing here. And I moved here about a year and a half ago because this is where I grew up in the Northwest. So to speak to your question, I grew up in Spokane, read Siddhartha when I was 15, like every burgeoning hippie. And, Herman Hesse has a certain lucidity around the, tidal forces in the young person's spirit. And then my parents were sort of Buddhist, something like that. And they, so I got introduced to some teachers through them. And then when I was 15 and read that book, I really intuited, the vision of a monk in the form of the Buddha in that book really burned into me. And I felt that I really needed to take this path seriously. So I began meditating daily. That daily practice increased through my attending college in Portland at Reed and Portland State. And then when I graduated, by the time I graduated, I was meditating, a significant amount every day. And it was certainly the most important part of my life. And then, I was basically looking at grad schools for psychotherapy, driving down the West Coast, and happened to stop by a monastery north of San Francisco called Abhayagiri in the Thai forest tradition. And stepping into that environment of quiet after, 4 days on the road of listening to podcasts and reading top 40 or listening to top 40 radio and reading, this and that, and just distracting myself as I had been for 3 years or 4 years, was very impactful. And I knew that I needed the container of a monastic environment if I wasn't going to dilute my life, and live a life worthy of my death. So I saw a video of Longpo Cha, Ajahn Chah, the progenitor of one of the current waves and lineages of the Thai forest tradition on YouTube, and his demeanor struck me deeply. If people want to look that up, it's just search for like Ajahn Chah, England or something, and you'll see this interview with a being who has obviously encountered something which is profound, and so wanting that, and I spent a bit of time at a Tibetan monastery near where I grew up in Spokane called Sravasti Abbey. But the Pali tradition always really resonated deeply with me, its simplicity, its clarity, and specifically the Thai Forest brand, its strictness of Vinaya, its intention to not handle money. These appeared important strictures in line with the Buddha's original intention for the Sangha to me. So I ended up going to Thailand and stepped into a monastery named Wat Mapjan, whose abbot is Ajahn Anan, a senior disciple of Ajahn Chah, and was just really struck by the loving kindness present there. And that was that, and that was about 10 years ago. And since then, it's been ordination and practicing in these forest monasteries, doing so in different parts of the world a bit, but always after that time, especially in Thailand, with these really masters of another caliber, feeling called back to the West, which is, feels kind of deep in my blood and home, to see what might begin here. I know there's so many people in the US who kind of encountered the Dhamma and have one foot in the monastery and one foot on a banana peel, so to speak, and to so many of the admonitions in the Vinaya around alms round, around not storing food, around not touching money, are for the sake of keeping the monastics from cutting themselves off in a spiritual cocoon and being a daily presence in people's lives. And the idea that a monastery could be created in the US, I mean, there definitely are some, but one that might be a bit closer to the city, in line with how they are in Thailand often, where people could access it more readily, and a home for monks was really interesting to me. So that's been the last 2 years, is coming to Seattle. I live in a little hut offered by these wonderful lay practitioners here every morning. Go for alms round in Pike Place in downtown Seattle. If you get food, you get food. If you don't, you don't. But people have been very generous. And we meet in this little gym up in Capitol Hill and have just been watching the community grow and coalesce. And just last month, we took about 30 of them to Thailand and India, Bodh Gaya, to sort of establish, the project on this firm grounded lineage. So that's a big rundown. Yeah.
It's a really wonderful vision. I'm really excited about it actually, to see how it unfolds. There's been, the other Dharma Gates folks and I are constantly looking for places that would be a good place for someone to visit and to practice and to train, and over time realize that there's not very many monasteries in the US, really, like fully operational kind of Buddhist communities where people can go and live, and especially on Dana, where there's no fees. That's
That's a
limited.
very important principle. Yeah.
Mhm. So I guess I wanna backtrack a little bit, because so I know many other people at this point who've had some calling towards ordination, but also it can be a kind of drawn out and confusing process to feel into, like, what is that, and what's one's own relationship to lineage, and to
Mm.
uh, discerning the kind of integrity or truth of one's kind of own aspiration. And so I guess I'd be curious, maybe in your experience, like how did the kind of drive, the call to ordain show up for you? And was there any inquiry around that, or was it just always like, this makes sense? And maybe also from your experience with other monastics, like what's that inquiry process like? And maybe what advice would you have for someone who's in that kind of like uh can be a little bit of a churn, like do I want to have a conventional life or not?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
great question. It's the question often.
Uh-huh.
Um, for me, I think many of us live with that sliver of a question in our hearts ever since we encounter the path. It's like, you know, what if someday I ordained or something? I think it's an archetypal drive in a sense. So it lives in a lot of us in a very good way. I mean, it's one lighthouse among many, but it's an important lighthouse for us as practitioners to have, is just that image of a renunciant and all that means, the fourth messenger. So I feel like it's a helpful orientation to have in a life. And my sense is really, for me, the fact that I was practicing daily since I was, even for half an hour, and then over a few years beginning to up practice to maybe an hour a day and then an hour and a half a day. Those over time, that daily uh, input of conditions really changes trajectory quietly, uh, in a way that's very reliable and very safe and very beautiful. And I think that the fluidity of my move towards robes was largely predicated on the fact that I was putting in those daily conditions of practice. So all to say that when someone kind of moves out of a difficult place in their life, hasn't really encountered the path much, but then begins to read and gets this strong drive to really just drop everything and go for it. Not to say that one shouldn't explore that, but um, that it's also okay to trust the slow accumulation of conditions in oneself. Um, but that those conditions sometimes do lead to other streams drying up and a sense of the trivial in one's life, and of kind of a steady and subtle nausea, of lack of alignment with one's true goal. Like when I was in college, I was doing good things, but it never felt worthy of my death. And I think death contemplations are really important practice to undertake if one is in order to clarify what one's priorities are. I mean, because what falls away in the face of that contemplation is everything that's not really worthy of you. Um, and so I think when people begin to get interested in ordination, just what I'll usually advise people is, uh, don't get too fixated on the robes right away. Just go visit some monasteries. Often people just haven't done that. It's like go stay there for a weekend and then stay there for a week. And then maybe, go back to work. You don't have to quit right away, but then maybe you can figure out next month another weekend. And in the Thai forest tradition, I would suggest visiting Abhayagiri in California, Temple Forest Monastery over on the East Coast, and there's other places, but those are two really good touchstones. And uh, then if one really takes to it, and the thing is, so many of these decisions are far too large and karmically weighted to be resolved through thought. It's an intuition in the body, and that means you have to go there and feel it and see what karmic conduits will open. And so often, 3 or 4 days, even at a monastery, will clarify everything. Like you really will have these deep intuitions which have been waiting, and suddenly there they are. And so yeah, to do that and to spend increasing amounts of time. And then I find often people really do, after they've touched into that environment for a long weekend and then maybe a week, maybe after that time, another week or 2 weeks at a different monastery and just kind of getting a feel of the landscape and what it means to exist in that, the karmic resonance really does hit and they find themselves less and less interested in their job. And then I think it's okay to take a leap and quit the job. Um, and just like consider it a dharmic field trip. Like maybe you don't know exactly what lineage you're interested in. Maybe you have some resonance with certain Mahayana teachings. At the same time, you love a certain clarity in another tradition. Um, and just, you don't have to decide right away. Like go have some fun in terms of visiting different monasteries. Like the worst that's going to happen is you get to spend time at monasteries with great teachers and get all these beautiful connections. Um, so, in that part, like a dharmic field trip I would advise in the US would be, yeah, Abhayagiri Temple, Empty Cloud in Newark, New Jersey, Wat Metta, which is Ajahn Nisabho's place in LA, Deer Park, which is Thich Nhat Hanh's community in California. I think there's Blue Cliff, I believe, in the East Coast from Thich Nhat Hanh. Sarvasti Abbey is a Tibetan abbey in Newport, Eastern Washington. There's Gempo Abbey, which is Pema Chodron's former place in near the East Coast. So those are just a few names to throw out, but like it's plenty for a Dharma field trip. And I don't know much about the Zen scene, but yeah, and the thing is, if one really does that and surrenders, yeah, then what's the worst that's going to happen is, you come back, either you really resonate with the place and you can travel overseas if you want. There's Sasana Buddharaka in Malaysia. There's Wat Mapjan in Thailand. There's Wat Panana Chat in Thailand. Those are all really good places. Um, and you stay, or you don't quite feel you're ready for it, and it's not quite the right fit, and you come back. But when people come to that point where they visited a monastery for a few long periods, practice has begun to mean a lot to them, and other roots have begun to dry up, and this question has gained weight and power in them, like, should I ordain? Should I be a monk or a nun? Um, I think people know if they don't try, if they don't actually go explore those monasteries and give some credence to that impulse, they'll always wonder the rest of their life if they had. Even if they do it and then they come back and it turns out it wasn't right, at least then they've actually tried, or pursued that path. And some people won't need to take that step. It'll be like a nice landmark, but actually you feel like you're flourishing and able to incorporate the Dhamma in your life as it is, and that's great. Um, but for me personally, there just came a point where I knew that I'd always wonder if didn't do it, and I also knew personally I needed the um, boundaries of the Vinaya to help hold me. And the tragedy of American life right now isn't sort of so often it's not a horrible wasting of yourself in uh, addiction, and although there's plenty of that, but it's just the slow dissolution of your purpose in clarity, in comfort and convenience, and a loss, and that's a tragic loss over 80 years, and it's hard, So just I think if one feels that kind of eating at one, and then the question of like, what can I give? Asking that, like, what's the greatest gift I could give to the world? So yeah, I mean, I'll just say one just has to, it sounds like a big landscape, but it's not that complicated. It's like meditate every day. If you feel interested, like you should just go to monasteries, whether or not you're interested in ordaining, go to monasteries. It's different than retreat. People don't get this, like it's a communal life. You're surrounded by this structure that's lasted for millennia. It's different than solo retreat. And I would say it's really important. Yeah, and if you resonate with the monasteries, if you feel a lot of draw there, then spend longer periods. And then at some point, if you're like, I want to really just spend a few months, then spend a few months. And if that requires you to quit your job and you have the ability to do it, then do it. And then just see where it goes. It's not that that confusing actually if you really just follow step by step.
Mm.
And the one other thing is lineage and where to ordain. And this might have been your next question, but do you mind if I launch into
Go for
that?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of us hold this, there's um, you step into one camp, one lit tradition, and especially with practitioners who haven't, uh, yeah, there can be a sort of rival football team uh, mentality at times, and one particular point of contention I find that arises is Mahayana and the Theravada. Especially the Theravada being perceived as somewhat selfish. Um, and I would just say that when one really, like, I know a lot of monks in this form who have the Bodhisattva vow in them, or at least some of their intention. I don't know what my path is. But I do have faith in that intuitive um, feel of what the practice right now is and what form feels kind of really harmonious to it and aligned. Um, and so, and I know, for me, like once you've found that practice and the stability in your holy life, there's a lot of things you can do with that foundation, but to not get too caught up in that brutal distinction, because I don't think it's as clear as people think it is, um, in terms of sort of each form can hold a lot of intentions behind it. And
Mm.
you have a lot of monks in Thailand who are Theravada, Mahayana, and I think then you have some, and so I think softening that distinction, but then also, yeah, really feeling, this is the beauty of touching into a few different traditions based on what kind of resonates is sort of go to Sravasti Abbey, see how that Tibetan, that's a beautiful community, see how that feels in your body for your practice. Go to a few Zen places and maybe a Thai forest place. These are just like the three I know. So, but and really trusting what kind of aligns with you. And I would say there are some significant points there in um, when you actually select a community. First, it is wonderful to have a teacher you really resonate with, but it's more important, I'd say, to have a community that really resonates with you, because the community and the day-to-day schedule is what you'll be touched by again and again and again, and what will determine your actions every single day. And honestly, after a time with the teacher themselves, it is good to have a teacher you really resonate with, but you will gain these informal connections where if you have a Dharma question, you can call this teacher. And then if you have a Vinaya question, you can call a different teacher. And you don't actually have to live with them all the time. Like when I have questions about formal practice or the suttas, I always call Ajahn Nisabho, Ajahn Jeff. And if I have other questions around my holy life, I might call Ajahn Pasano. And I don't live with either of them. And I just think like, yeah, it's hard. It's almost impossible to find a place which will meet every single condition you're looking for. So just taking as paramount the community, the sort of resonance in your heart level, and a general ethic of flourishing um, flourishing, and normalcy are really important metrics for Westerners. It's very easy to get in this path and just want to like renounce everything and go and eat little, speak little, sleep little, just be alone. And it's not a sustainable way to live the holy life. I think finding a community where you're really in community, it's one of the reasons the Ajahn Chah tradition and Sravasti Abbey have been so successful is there's a huge focus on communal life. And you come into the contact with the Pali Suttas or certain, archetypes of monks or nuns meditating alone, and you think, I want that. And initially we all come and we really do want to meditate alone, and that's great. And you have time for that in the monastic life, but it's not we come at it so often as Westerners in these very siloed existences. And especially if you're in it for the long game, finding a community that will integrate you and learning to live with people is essential. And I think the proof's really in, for lack of a better word, the pudding. Look at how many senior Western monastics are coming out of that tradition. And if you're seeing like, okay, there's some three vasa, like that's how we measure our years, monks that are aged 3 years, 4 years, maybe there's one or two who have made it to 10 around the world, you know, I would not pursue that ordination path, because odds are there's a lot of people going in and there's very few coming out and managing to stay in robes. So look for a tradition that's producing many senior monks who are able, and nuns that are able to stay in robes. And um, from what I've seen, those communities will be the ones that are really community, which are, actually learning to live together, and you'll have time to practice alone. But having a structure and a fabric that will hold you over the many, many years, which you're going forth, if that's the case and that's what you want to do, is essential. Um, so those are just some thoughts from me. It's a long answer, but
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
long
No,
question.
it's great getting into it. Um, there was one thing that kind of stood out to me as being a pretty important part of this whole process, which is, I think you phrased it as like these other rivers drying up or something. It's like when you practice and some of the old fuel sources or some of the old things that were uh, kind of supporting your way of living start to not feel so
Mm.
nourishing anymore. It's like you see them at a deeper level. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about that's very interesting is that's somewhat similar to a kind of like depression or despair that a
Mm.
lot of people, I think, are just feeling generally right now about kind of the state of the world, or there's a lot of things going on. And it's hard to almost like, there's this shift where um, suddenly that becomes like kind of a powerful fuel for like doing something different. But for so many people, if that shift doesn't happen, it just becomes kind of a collapse.
Mm.
And I don't know if you like if that resonates. That was just sort of a reflection, but
Absolutely. There's a Pali word called Samvega.
mhm.
Veg means wave. Um, Actually, no, it also, I think, it might be related to the word for vision and to see, but sang sort of is an intensifier, and it's pretty impossible to translate. But basically, it means it's composed of a sense of, in the suttas, it comes up with the uh, aristocrat named Venerable Yasa, named Yasa, and he is a high-ranking, rich merchant's son who, the story goes, he wakes up after a night watching, a big party, and sees all the dancing girls and the musicians sort of sleeping around the house, and just suddenly he perceives them all as corpses, and he basically runs away, looking for anything that's different, and comes across the Buddha, who teaches him and then ordains him. Um, and Samvega is so often epitomized by his story, but it's both the alienation, a certain chastisement at our own complicity and our foolishness of the world, and a sense of urgency. And I would say that sense of urgency comes with also some faith at times, or at least it's an opening to faith and brightness. And the difference between depression and Samvega is that brightness opening in a new direction. And, it's the difference between Plato's prisoner realizing that the play in front of them is shadow and lowering their eyes, and them turning their head towards a vision of light in their periphery and walking towards something new. And yeah, so in sort of classic depression and even, addiction, often there really is wisdom behind it. Like you're seeing through the veil. But I'd say in terms of intuiting that other route forward, um, you're losing so many sources of what held you. And it's wonderful to begin to replace, as much of that as you can with sources of dharmic uh, meaning and pleasure, and including, yes, like listen to some Dhamma talks, read, join what sitting groups are available in your area, and um, online communities you can access. I do find for some people, if the Samvega is hitting really, really hard, then you need more to replace it. And that, I think, does come from actual physical proximity to Sangha, and to, if you have obligations in a home life, then somehow trying to carve out time when you can go visit a monastery. Go on retreat is good, but also really visit a monastery. Or if you can go for a longer period, touch into that. And I find that like coming into an environment like that tends to open up so many of the doors which need to open for light to be let in when the other sources of light have begun to sputter and burn out. Um, the karmic forces are deep, and I just don't know if they can all be transferred through the conduit of, you know, subscribing to the right dharmic podcasts. Like you've actually got to go there, see what's waiting for you. And often, that really might be enough for someone's life is, they touch into these sources, they go a few times every year. But so that's important. And then, of course, to infuse one's life with as many other dharmic, um, uh, strata as possible, and bringing mindfulness to one's day as much as one can. That's all really good. But community, dharmic community, is so, so significant for us. For the gem of this life to begin to grow and be held, you've got to create a world which can hold it. And that includes finding people who will help you hold it and who value it as you do. So, and I know you know this as well. And you, by the way, I think some of what I haven't spoken to in terms of Dharmic centers are the Zen centers and places, which I think you have a much better finger on the pulse of. So that's certainly a resource as well for people.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna post all of those centers that have been listed and some of the Zen centers that I know in the kind of notes for this, because people might be curious to check them out. Um, but yeah, I think it made me think about it kind of all loops together in a way where one of the I guess my hypotheses about um is that some just doing this kind of solitary sitting practice, it can up the samvega, but it doesn't really like, it's hard to find the nourishment. And so then and it can end up moving in the direction of despair, like of you just feel isolated in your like understanding, and then it's hard to know how to move forward.
Mm,
Where there's something with the touching into to something that's kind of the, I guess how you said it was like allowing new light to come in.
mm. Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think it's one of the issues with certain traditions really sort of sitting. Yeah, I'm just trying to, don't know how many names I should name and stuff. But I think that there's a real aspect to faith, not just translated as confidence, but there's a real uplift and love in the heart that can keep someone going. And props help, the Buddha image, the um, surrounding oneself with things like that, and having a bit of ritual as well, holding one's life. There's a culture, and that's a very healthy, healing thing. Um, in Freudian psychology, there's two instincts. There's the Eros life instinct, which is towards generativity, creation, um, contributing to the world. And then there's Thanatos, the death instinct, which is initially manifest as aggression and then gets turned back on oneself as the superego by socialization, by one's socialization as a child. And I find people come in with all their hearts to the Dhamma, and so often there's so few roots for eros, for life instinct, for generativity. It all gets turned into Thanatos. That whole river runs towards Thanatos, or most of it, where it's like, all right, I need to sit more, be quieter, I need to sleep less, I need to renounce this, I need to give up this. And that chopping off of one's self, piece by piece by piece, is, you begin to sense the flavor of Thanatos behind it. It's the superego given full reign and full resources of one's Dharma Chanda. And there is a place for renunciation and clarity of vision and boundaries, but you need life and rejoicing, and you need to acknowledge that as a person, especially a young person, we have a drive to contribute meaningfully to the world and to a community, and ambition in that sense, in a wholesome sense of wanting to do something good. And that's all eros. And if you don't give yourself any root for that, in a community, to take on a generative role, such as, at monasteries, there's a guest monk, there's, you're translating teachings every day, you're just going out there and working to help out, hold the monastery. And then in the afternoon, you have your meditation time in the evenings, and you have a long retreat once a year, etc. At least this is how it is in the Thai forest tradition. But there's also all these roots for eros and contribution. And that means, yeah, and if it's just sitting, you're right. It really is just a steady darkening of vision. And there's a clarity too, but it's not enough to hold one over. From my experience, faith will carry someone about 5 years in robes. And then if they haven't found an internal source of happiness, they get knocked out. And the proximate cause is often falling for someone, sensual desire, something else. But the deeper cause is that the heart is dried up. And I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind, that this aspect of eros and generative role and giving freedom to the part of us which wants to contribute and be a part of a community and love, in a very wholesome sense of giving love in service. It's a manifestation of metta, of the Brahma Viharas, but for many people, it might be enough just to be part of the community. But there is an artistic side of people, and for certain people that's very strong, for creative types, that is also a manifestation of eros. And I find often there's very little room for that made in practice circles. And if someone is an artist, and many of us were, and you come into an environment where you're no longer encouraged or even allowed to write a poem, to, do some calligraphy, to paint icons, to give breadth of room to that more refined element of eros, it really makes those type of people, and I think to some extent a lot of people, even if that's not their dominant personality aspect or quality, it makes them dry up. So I really encourage, like, a bit of, if people are sort of going into these environments of monasteries or of hardcore practice, to, like, that's one way of opening that conduit of light for many people. And it's worth noting the Christian traditions don't have some of our meditative tools, but they can often keep monastics, and what they do have is art. And they have icon painting, they have singing. I can't sing, and you'd want to get permission from your teacher, the monastery, before painting icons. But I know a monk who does it and makes beautiful pictures of Ajahn Chah and and Saint Francis. And I know many monastics who write poetry. Uh, and just to say that, like, there really is a nourishment in that too, and a light, a brightness, and something about rejoicing. So all to say, I think this, yeah, what you pointed out is really important. Finding
Mhm.
a way to manifest, how can you find a way to be a whole human being in robes or even in a really intense practice environment? And that takes creativity and stubbornness, because most of those environments have big walls for a reason, and bright lines and a certain ethic to hold them against the world, and that's necessary. But it means that you're going to have to be creative to figure out how to piece yourself back together out of this blown apart puzzle you were, when all these other routes to love have been cut off. And this should be a path of love. Just got to find a way to find, to open those conduits.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's like um it's almost like, if you don't find out how to resource and like nourish that piece of yourself, in some ways you're going to be limited in terms of how deep you can go in the practice, because um I mean, I've had this experience where if you come at it with too much superego, like too much like should, the discipline, the like intense willpower thing will hold you for a little while. Um, and you can have powerful experiences, and then at some point it just kind of, you might still like want to awaken or whatever, but there's a part of you that's just gonna be like, oh, like like we're done.
Yeah,
Um, mm,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, I had a few more questions that are maybe like a little bit more like uh pragmatic or logistical. So for people who don't know, like uh what is, I mean, obviously you can't go through all the Vinaya rules now, but what's the kind of defining quality of ordination in the Thai forest for folks who don't fully or in the Theravada really aren't fully familiar with that?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So perhaps the uh, what the Thai forest tradition is most known for is its adherence to, as close as possible, to most of the uh, Buddha's original monastic code he laid out, at least as embodied in the Pali tradition. Although the Vinayas, even though the teachings and the sutras and the suttas you come across in different traditions are emphasized differently, the Vinaya actually corresponds quite well across traditions, at least in the scripture, in how it's held. That's different. Um, and so in the Thai forest tradition, monastics, ordaining basically means complete celibacy. Um, it means all these rules centered around simplicity of being in singleness of purpose. So we're not allowed to watch movies, listen to music, um, and a large aspect of the training, also, only have three robes, although we have these little, like, monastic jackets. A big part of the monastic code centers also around surrender and faith. And that's embodied through the fact that we can't touch money, store food, or really ask for anything except water unless we're ill or unless someone has invited us to. And what that means is, in Thailand, at least, every morning you go walk for alms, and people are inspired and they give or they don't. In the West, some monasteries, people will come there and offer food. Um, but some, and this is the ethic, we hold here, is they are close enough to the city and population centers where you actually can walk in for alms and just seeing what happens. And there's a real magic to it. People don't often know what I am when I'm at Pike Place. We were looking at where to go for alms round, and we found this first Starbucks on the map, and I'm like, that's where we're going. So, just go down to Pike Place every morning and wait, down there for in downtown Seattle for about a half an hour, and uh, people, yeah, it's kind of magical. People come, and either they know I'm going to be there and they bring food, or sometimes it's really random passersby. And we have another practice in the tradition called Tudong, which is where you basically wander on faith. So I've done several. I've done one from LA to Wat Metta. I've done one north of San Francisco for a few weeks. We've had one monk do one pretty much for 3 years on the East Coast. And people don't know you're going to be there. You don't know if you're going to get food. You just sort of stand different places and hope people will offer you food. We can only eat before noon, and monastics in my tradition often eat only once a day. We do here. So yeah, that's your one meal of the day, and yet people come forward and they're interested and want to talk to you, and then they maybe they're like, what are you doing here? And you say, well, I'm actually a monk. I am out off going for alms. And then maybe they try to offer you a few dollars, and you say, actually, I can't even touch money. I'm sorry. I'm just accept food. And then often sometimes they're like, oh, sorry, and they walk away. And then other times they actually offer you a sandwich or something. And it's just amazing how the goodness that's inherent in the world and that you get to see when every day you're depending on it and opening to it. For example, sometimes people will come down to offer the meal, some food into my bowl, but they don't realize that when they offer the monastic meal, it's basically 3 meals in one, because we only eat once a day. So, there was a day in the past in Seattle where someone offered like not all that much, and it's like, okay, it's going to be a hungry day. It's fine. You just accept it and gratefully, the point is to be out there as a messenger of the path a bit. And so walking back, and then out of nowhere, this homeless guy came out of an alleyway with a box of protein bars, and he's like, here. And I was like, that's never happened ever, and it's magical how the world does this. And that's actually a big part of what it means to be a monk or a nun is learning that aspect of surrender and trusting the Buddha's wisdom. And we can't drive. The aspect of surrender sort of has its place within a community too. Many of our rules are about how to care for a senior monastic who we've taken dependence on. So for the first 5 years, you take dependence on a teacher and care for them, take instruction from them. After 5 years, there's a bit more freedom to go elsewhere. And if during any of that period you discover that you don't resonate with the teacher you're with, the Buddha didn't make you stay. Like, you can move to another place. But you are supposed to find a teacher for those first 5 years that you can be with. And so like learning to care for a community and a teacher and put yourself aside, those are huge aspects of the training and very emphasized in the Thai forest tradition. And then there's generally just a simplicity of life. At say Abhayagiri in California, you'd wake up at 4 a.m. Meditation would be at 5 a.m. There'd be chanting, brief meal or brief breakfast for some people who wanted it, and a work meeting. Go into the forest and do some work, clearing things, or maybe building stuff in the workshop, or helping translate or processing audio from Dhamma talks. Then there's a sort of group meal around 11 a.m. In some of the Western monasteries, there's these 2 meals before noon. In some, there's only one. And in Thailand, mostly there's one. And then the afternoon would be free to meditate or study or do as you wanted. And then in the evening, there'd be sort of a tea time where you get to speak with the senior monk, or the lay people come to speak with the senior monk, and then you have chanting and meditation into the evening. Generally, once a week, there might be an all-night vigil where you stay up during the moon day until like 3 a.m. or so, listening to Dhamma talks and practicing. Once a year, there's a 3-month retreat where you usually go into quiet for 3 months of silence, where you really refocus on practice. Yeah, so those are kind of the basics.
Mhm. It's very thorough. Yeah. Um, Great. So I guess I have one, I think it's just one last question, which I hope not to end on a kind of a downer note, but I think it's a good question that's worth addressing, which is, are there any circumstances in which somebody should definitely not ordain, or
Mm,
it's not really the appropriate move, or it's kind of a maybe an unripe like intention?
mm, that's a good question. If people have a child who's not yet of age, I think it puts an enormous question mark on ordaining. And I've seen very few circumstances where that's not seemed like a reason to not do it until that child is 18 or so.
Mhm.
Um, I think there are some situations where it would be okay, such as the Buddha. I think he went back and basically ushered his father, his son, and his wife all into some level of enlightenment. So he did all right. And then the rest of us, like his karmic conditions were astounding. But for most people, I think it really, that can be a big thing. And yeah, that's, and then there's other restrictions around the Vinaya, like if your parents won't give you permission, you're not supposed to go forth. Um, if you're in debt. But I wouldn't take those, I wouldn't assume if those conditions will apply after a while of following an intention towards ordination and seeing what happens. Often debts magically clear up. Often parents really do come around. Um, So yeah, I think if there's that deep calling in someone, then it's worth going and spending time in monasteries and seeing what happens. And I'd say one of the few harder stops, if not a complete hard stop, would be having a kid. Even if someone's married, you really might find with some conversation and maybe there comes a point where even with that, there's an acknowledgement from both partners that this is what needs to happen. I know one monk who came back from a retreat and his wife's like, "You want to become a monk, don't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so they ended up, it happened, and it was the right decision for him. And I think she's doing well too. So yeah, good question though.
Mm. Yeah, I guess
But
yeah.
but I would also just really quickly put out that like it's great if people want to explore, but not to people can live such powerful practice lives as lay practitioners if they orient their lives around it, if they really work to bring mindfulness in their daily lives, if maybe they do have conditions which just aren't conducive to ordaining this lifetime or now. And um, to know that if they really turn towards the conditions of their life, they can turn a normal middle class life, lower class, upper class, whatever, into the path. And you know, one of the people I'm referencing here who did want to ordain and was turned down because he had a son, basically came back and completely gave himself to just being a very good father. And that became his whole practice. And he said that since then, like the first three of the paramitas, the spiritual perfections, have been almost a mantra for him. Dana, sila, nekama, giving, morality, renunciation, basically where every moment he's asking, what can I give right now? What can I give up right now? How can I act most ethically? And he still goes to monasteries a lot. He's serving a 3-month retreat right now at a monastery. but he's also managed to be more monastic than many monks I know, and he lives as a layman. And so it's really not, you know, I'm wary of people fracturing their path into two hard lines of practice as a monastic or wasting away or, trivializing their life as a lay person. And it doesn't have to be that simple.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that, I've debated quite a bit with my friend Nikki about sort of, I mean, it seems from from everything I've heard from a lot of teachers I respect, you can kind of uh practice poorly in either situation.
That is very accurate.
Yeah. Mhm. Um,
You can practice well in either too.
yeah, yeah. So I think we'll move towards wrapping up here in a few minutes, but I did have one more thought on that, which is there's a kind of growing awareness or sensitivity in Western meditation and Buddhism around the relationship between like trauma or mental illness and intensive practice. And like, I know a few years ago, I was having a lot of anxiety, and it ended up resolving largely through practice and really kind of bringing in some Qigong and Chinese medicine and like energy modalities into my life. But there was a kind of framework that I encountered, which sort of cautions against intensive practice in the face of having, uh, I didn't have extremely high levels of childhood trauma or something like that, and so I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I mean, I'm sure you are in the sense of people coming to wanting to do more sort of intensive practice or ordination with these kind of more complex backgrounds. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think isn't there like an institute recently called like Zebra Institute or something, which
Eat a
focuses.
house.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard of that. I'm so glad those resources exist. I know there's definitely monks I know who could have benefited from that. Yeah, yeah, I think I've seen that. I don't have experience with trauma personally, and yet I think I have seen people really tie themselves up into pretty big knots, and I think it is one of the safeguards of if one is of balancing out kind of intensive solo practice with time in monasteries and but community focused monasteries. There's just a lot of safeguards. It's like half your day, you're actually going to be working in the kitchen. If you start to get too kind of in your head, like someone will hit you with a sponge or something will come up and people get to notice. You're actually have all these roots for these um, for these deeper forces in you where you're not trying to channel it all down the meditation route. Um, so that's all very useful. So yeah, I think kind of diving headlong into just meditation is really uh, can be problematic if you're not balancing it with um, modes of service and community. I think that's really important. And I think, like serving Goenka retreats and stuff can have a lot of that. But I think also finding, yeah, periods at least, where you're really a part of community and looking for those and not dismissing them as less deep in practice. Like I've seen the effects over years of people who've practiced in community like that, and it's very beautiful. So
It reminds me of I'm you may or may not be familiar, but there's this very well-known book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And he talks about how, these kind of embodied practices are powerful ways of healing trauma, but also like positive attunement from other people is the main method of healing. And so It seems like the best or the most effective practice environments in kind of from this conversation and also my understanding too have this like effect of you get positive attunement from more advanced or like also practitioners. You get very kind of like wholesome kinds of uh attention really, and then you also sit and you do all the practices and it brings stuff up, but there's this almost feedback loop between those where a lot becomes possible, where if you're just sitting and you're not getting any of that kind of attunement, it can be hard. It can be, things might not keep moving necessarily. Um it reminds me of that. Well, I want to thank you for this conversation. It was really wonderful. I think it's going to be a great resource as people have a chance to listen to it. At least that's what I'm hoping. Um, I'm going to share the links to the monasteries you mentioned. I think I caught them all in the event description. So if people want to find out any more about those, I'll also share the link to Clear Mountain Monastery, the aspiring Clear Mountain Monastery. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is just a couple more about things about Dharma Gates. If people wanted to learn more about us and what we're doing, we have a website, which is dharma-gates.org. And primarily our mission is helping connect young adults to formal practice, but obviously all of our online offerings are open to anybody. And also we do a program which is it's called a one-on-one advising. So if you fill out a form on our website and are interested in having a conversation about attending a retreat or doing a period of residential practice or basically deepening your practice in some way, we'll set up a conversation on Zoom. It's donation based, and you'll just talk to myself or somebody else from the team. Or if your inquiry is a little bit outside of our ballpark, we'll try to connect you with somebody who might be able to field your questions. So we'll might pass you on to Nisabho Bhikku if you have a question about the nuances of the Theravada or something like that. So we do that. We have a newsletter. We have some online offerings, which you can keep track of in our newsletter. And if you're under the age of 35, you're welcome to attend our in-person events, we do multi-day retreats pretty regularly across mostly the eastern half of the US, but we're gradually expanding. So that's a rough, everything we do is donation based. And yeah, hope if you're listening, you get on our newsletter and hear what we're doing. So I think that's about it. Thanks
Aaron,
again.
no, thank you for the vision of Dharma Gates. I mean, it's really, it's uh, it's a powerful mission. And yeah, I'm glad there's a resource growing of this nature, and for the ethic of keeping it Dharma based and all that, what a beautiful thing. So thank you for having me, and good luck to you and to the others listening. Yeah, I hope your Dharma path opens gracefully.
May it be so.